Hello everyone, tonight we are standing ankle deep in warm, sticky mud that smells like sulfur and forgotten rain. Dragonflies the size of your hand flicker across the sky like silver stitches on faded denim. The air hums with low vibrating calls, nothing you'd recognize, but your chest tightens anyway. Something out there is awake. It's watching you from the shadow of the ferns, and it has been for a while. You reach down expecting to touch rock, but what your fingers find is something dry, fragile, and feather-light. It crunches like stale toast under your palm. A bone, maybe, but it doesn't feel like a bone. It feels like a secret. This isn't the part where you survive. You're too soft, too slow, too sure of your place in the food chain. The earth beneath your feet has no loyalty to you. It remembers a time when survival meant being hollow. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. Always fun to imagine who else is falling asleep to ancient monsters tonight. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle forward on the floodplain and the ground exhales. Yes, exhales beneath your weight. It's not breathing, not really. But the mud here overlays a fossil bed that was once teeming with giants that didn't thud when they walked. They floated. Or tried to. You crouch near a patch of reeds where something has warped the growth pattern. There's a slight mound, the sort you'd mistake for a tree root. You dig gently, and your fingers catch on something with texture like burnt paper. It's a bone. Thin-walled, irregular, hollow. And now you're starting to get suspicious, because most of the time bones are dense. That's how they anchor muscle. Bear weight break inconveniently when you fall off a skateboard. But this one feels engineered. Like it was meant to move without resisting air. The kind of thing you'd expect from a hawk or an eagle, not a 10-foot-tall reptile. Here's the twist. It belonged to a dinosaur. Yes, dinosaurs, the lumbering, tail-dragging, thunder-footed titans of the prehistoric world. Some of them were light on their feet, literally. Hollow bones aren't just about weight. They're about breathing. Modern birds use something called a unidirectional airflow system. Instead of breathing in and out like mammals do, air flows through a series of sacs and tubes that allow them to absorb oxygen continuously, even when they exhale. Efficient, elegant, a little terrifying when you think about it, and some dinosaurs had the same system. Not just little ones either. Massive theropods like Allosaurus, and even early cousins of T-Rex show signs of air sacs in their fossilized bones. Historians still debate whether this means all of them had bird-like breathing or just a subset, but the fact remains they didn't all breathe like reptiles. There's a reason some of them lasted millions of years. Evolution doesn't play favorites, but it does reward innovation. You stand up brushing your fingers against the fine powder of ancient marrow. In the distance, a storm rolls low across the plain, clouds curling like the spine of some sleeping leviathan. You watch it unfold, the sky flashing pink and copper. And you wonder how many creatures were buried not by age but by weather. Floods, ash, ice. There's something funny about extinction. Sometimes it's slow like a fever. Other times, it's a lightning bolt. You turn back toward the ridge where the trail disappears beneath a curtain of vines. There's movement up there. Not fast, not big, but something. Fun fact, there are frogs alive today whose skeletons get so thin in the dry season that they're partially translucent. You can literally see their organs flutter under the skin. Nature's weird like that. It cuts corners. It borrows tricks. It recycles genius. So maybe hollow bones weren't the final destination. Maybe they were a prototype. A halfway house between reptile and bird. Or maybe, and this is what you're beginning to suspect, they were the destination all along. The future just dressed in scales and feathers before it knew how to fly. There's a whine from somewhere overhead, mechanical and sharp. A dragonfly dives past your ear, aggressive in its joy. You flinch because your brain still registers buzzing insects as prehistoric drones sent to scout you out. You wouldn't be wrong. Above you, the trees sway in rhythm, exposing the ridge. And for a moment, just a moment, you swear you see something perch on a branch. It isn't flapping. It's watching you. You blink. It's gone. Maybe it was never there. Or maybe it never left. You find it again the next morning, different patch of ground, same eerie texture. Another bone. This one is longer, straighter, and when you knock your knuckles lightly against it, it sounds faintly like tapping a roll of cardboard, which is unsettling. Nothing this old should sound that empty. You hold it up to the rising sun, and light spills right through the thin edges. It glows like stained glass, not because it's fragile though it is, but because it was built that way on purpose. Hollow, yes, but also strong, almost like scaffolding. A bone that wasn't solid. By now, you're learning to doubt everything Jurassic Park taught you. Back then, paleontologists assumed dinosaur bones were basically reptile bones, dense, thick, packed with marrow. But then some clever human, probably wearing khaki and holding tweezers, sliced into one and said, guys, and science had to sit down for a moment. They found internal structures called pneumatic cavities, little air pockets within the bones, just like in modern birds. You're looking at a femur right now that weighs less than a baguette, but once held up a creature the size of a van. Which means that beast didn't stomp, it strutted. Historians still debate whether these features evolved once and were inherited by birds or popped up independently in different dinosaur lineages. Evolution's not exactly a polite dinner guest. It makes a mess, leaves half-finished projects everywhere, and doesn't clean up its fossils. You're now standing at the edge of a dried riverbed. At some point long after these creatures passed a flood, drag their bones together. The sun bakes the cracked earth below you, drawing spiderweb fractures across the fossil-rich mud. You kneel again, and beside that first bone lies part of a vertebra. The kind that should be a heavy load-bearing thing, but this one looks hollowed out as if it were made for breathing. Not just support. It's like this dinosaur was part balloon, part skeleton. There's a myth that hollow bones are weak. But the truth is their internal struts called trabeculae act like the internal supports in aircraft wings. They give strength without adding weight. Think of it as nature's blueprint for flight, before actual flight even began. And here's a twist, not all hollow-boned dinosaurs could fly. In fact, most of them didn't. Take theropods, the bipedal, meat-loving maniacs of the Mesozoic. They walked upright, had fierce claws, and many had hollow bones. They weren't soaring over mountains, they were running, leaping, breathing with more oxygen efficiency than most mammals. You lean back against a fossilized log still warm from the morning sun. The wind stirs the dust around you, revealing just the tip of something white and sharp sticking out of the ground. Another bone. This place is full of them, as if some celestial wind just dumped a load of ancient skeletons here, like yard clippings. Fun fact, there's a kind of modern bird called a hoatzin that ferments its food in its gut like a cow. It smells awful and flies terribly, but it shares DNA with the birds that came from those hollow-boned dinosaurs. Just goes to show flight might be glorious, but evolutionary leftovers can be weird and squishy. Anyway, you stand up and stretch, listening to your own spine crack like a campfire log. Your bones are solid, heavy. Good for walking upright, not great for falling out of trees. But these creatures, they were built differently. And maybe, just maybe, they were the first test pilots of evolution. They didn't need wings yet. They just needed to move efficiently, lighter, faster, quieter. You close your eyes for a moment and you hear it, not a roar, not a growl, but the soft huff of air passing through lungs that don't quite fit your mammal expectations. It's like breathing through bamboo. Something alive, ancient, and outrageously well-designed. You imagine a creature stepping through this very clearing millions of years ago, not slinking like a reptile, not waddling like a bird. Something in between. Sinewy, balanced ribs flaring with each inhale. Watching, breathing, waiting. It turns its head toward you, but it doesn't move. You open your eyes, stillness. The fossils are silent again, but you start to notice something new. They weren't buried at random. There's a pattern to how these bones rest, light ones near the surface, heavy ones deeper down. It's like the land knew to lift the hollow ones closer to air, as if they wanted to be found. You dust off the femur you picked up earlier, give it one last tap and tuck it into your satchel. Don't worry, you're not stealing. You're just borrowing a little mystery. You're not alone anymore. Something rustles in the reeds, and it's not the wind this time. You freeze, half-crouched, hands still on the fossil-stuffed satchel like it's going to protect you from the past. There's a long, hissing exhale, a real one, not some poetic metaphor, and then silence. You inch forward, and you find them, a whole herd or what's left of one. Skeletons mostly, but arranged in a way that's almost social, as if they fell together. Nestled near one another, like they were part of something that mattered more than just survival. They were ornithomimosaurs, ostrich-mimic dinosaurs. Fast, lightweight, and unmistakably bird-like. Long tails, hollow bones, and legs like coiled springs. You picture them dashing across this very ground, kicking up dust, their air sac lungs inflating in waves across their bodies. Modern birds breathe like this but the air doesn't stop. It flows through a series of sacs front-rear, even some inside their bones like air taking a scenic route through the body. More efficient than mammal lungs. Way more. It's like upgrading from a straw to a leaf blower. And guess what? These dinosaurs did the same thing. Pneumatic bones, meaning air-filled, weren't just for shaving weight. They were also part of a high-efficiency respiratory system that cooled the body during intense activity. Think of it as nature's AC unit for fast, hot-blooded creatures that couldn't afford to overheat in the Mesozoic sun. You crouch beside a long-dead juvenile, its ribs curled in on themselves like parentheses. And just for a moment you match its posture. Try to imagine what it felt like, lungs inflating sideways, not up and down. Breath moving in loops instead of stops. Efficient. Constant. Unnatural, at least by mammal standards. You remember learning about birds in school, right? Hollow bones for flying? Cute fact, but no one told you about the breathing system that made flight possible long before feathers got involved. Historians still debate whether this system evolved because of flight or before it. Chicken, meat, egg. The fossils suggest it started while these creatures were still earthbound. Long-legged runners that couldn't yet fly but breathed like they were practicing for it. One of the bones near your knee still holds a trace of the cervical air sac, a tube that once snaked down the neck, feeding oxygen directly into the lungs. It's fossilized, sure, but the shape remains a kind of skeletal memory of breath. And you feel yours slowing to match. Fun fact, giraffes have a weirdly inefficient breathing system for such long necks. They kind of pant. But these dinosaurs, their breathing got better the longer their necks were. You can't prove it yet, but you suspect some of them may have even sung across the plains, letting those long tracheas rumble like didgeridoos. A breeze whistles through a gap in the rock nearby. You'd laugh, but it really does sound like a breath. One long, low exhale. Somewhere a gecko chirps, or maybe it's something older. You wander through the bone field, picking your way past the curled ribs, the long limbs, the delicate beaks. These weren't clumsy lizards dragging tails, they were upright, balanced, curious. And yeah, predators probably hated them. Not because they were tough, but because they were fast and light and constantly full of air. Try pinning down a balloon in a wind tunnel. One creature larger than the rest lies half buried in sand. Its legs are drawn up as if it tried to flee but didn't quite make it. You crouch again, you're doing a lot of crouching today. Prehistoric archaeology is basically squatting with purpose and brush away the sediment. There it is a broken rib, but it didn't snap like a twig. It folded almost like it was meant to crumple on impact, protecting something inside. You've seen car crumple zones less sophisticated than this. You stand up, stretch, and look out across the flats. In the distance, you imagine the herd as it once was, neck feathers, fluttering limbs, tight with energy, breathing not just with lungs but with their whole frames. They didn't rest between breaths. Air just moved through them. That alone would have changed everything. With more oxygen in the bloodstream, you run faster, react quicker, heal faster. You don't have to stop to pant, you just keep going. Sound familiar? That's you when you're 12 running downhill, arms out, lungs wide open. That's every sprinter, every cheetah, every machine built for speed. And it all started here with a group of hollow-boned, air-sac-huffing, birdish dinosaurs that nobody told you were this cool. You breathe in now slowly and feel your ribs expand. One breath, one loop of air. You're not built like them, but tonight you're close. You've gone deeper now into a canyon where the walls are too steep for wind to bother, and the light feels ancient, like it's been traveling for millions of years just to reach you. You press your back to the rock and let your fingers trail across the surface. There are shapes here, grooves, impressions. Not of feet, but of lungs. Well, not lungs exactly, but the bones around them. Thin ringed vertebrae etched with marks where something soft once pressed again and again against the hard frame of a living beast. You follow the patterns and realize these aren't scratches or accidents. They're traces of air sacs' internal balloons that never fossilized but left their fingerprints behind. Like a ghost curled up in the rib cage. Some of these air sacs attached to the spine. Others reached into the shoulders or the hips, and some weirdly connected all the way into the skull. You're looking at an ancient breathing system that threaded itself through bone like ivy through stone. It didn't just sit in the chest like ours, it reached everywhere. You picture a creature standing above you now, eyes blinking slow air, moving in gentle pulses through its bones. Not in and out, through. As if its breath didn't belong to it, it just passed through, borrowed, and returned like library air. Historians still debate how this system functioned without collapsing under pressure. Modern birds use rigid lungs and air sacs that contract around them. The lungs don't expand at all. Instead, they stay stiff like a coral reef while the air flows one way through them in a constant stream. It's elegant, over-designed even. A bit like having 6 fans cooling one motor. And dinosaurs, some of them had it first. You take a seat on a stone shelf and trace one long groove in the rock with your thumb. Imagine trying to understand breathing just by looking at bones. No soft tissue remains, no lungs, no muscles, just holes in the wrong places and bones too light for their size. Paleontologists first called them pneumatopores because everything sounds smarter in Latin. Basically, they're little holes in the bone, often near the neck, shoulder, or back, that connect to the air sac system. The presence of these holes told scientists, hey, this wasn't just a bone. It was part of a machine. You rub your own chest, your ribs move when you breathe. In, out, simple. But these dinosaurs, their air sacs might have pushed air through a network of tubes while the lungs themselves stayed mostly still. The bones worked with the breath, not against it. Now think about what that means for energy. A creature with unidirectional airflow can extract oxygen more efficiently. They can take in more O2 with every step, every chase, every climb. That means longer sprints, faster escapes, better hunting, and less recovery time. These weren't just well-adapted animals, they were biological hot rods, and they probably didn't even know it. You stand and walk farther into the canyon where the rock narrows and the air cools. The stone underfoot turns gray and slick, and something shiny catches your eye. It's another fossil. This time it's part of a furcula, what we'd now call a wishbone. Birds have them. Some dinosaurs did too. It's not just for making birthday wishes. It stores energy like a spring, releasing it with each flap or leap. Even in grounded dinosaurs, it might have helped with breathing, flexing, and recoiling with each step. You tap it gently and hear that same hollow talk sound you're starting to recognize. Not empty, not fragile, just built for something else. Fun fact, some modern birds have 9 air sacs. 9. It's not even fair. Meanwhile, you get 2 lungs and the occasional sinus infection. A drip of water lands on your forehead from above. You look up. High on the canyon wall is a streak of dark mineral where rainwaters carved a smooth, glossy channel over centuries. And right beside it, another groove in the stone. Not water-shaped, rib-shaped. The fossil is high up, but you know it's there. Another body frozen in time spine, arched ribs like bent reeds, air sacs long gone but never forgotten. It must have died on a slope. Maybe during a landslide. Maybe in its sleep. Maybe it fell from the higher ground while running from something worse. That's the thing about air-filled bones, they're a blessing until they're not. Lighter bodies mean faster movement, but also more fragility. You're looking at an evolutionary gamble. Risk traded for reward. Fragility for flight, or at least the possibility of flight. And it's starting to make you wonder, did nature know where this was going? Did the air sacs evolve just to lighten the load? Or was it all building towards something else? Were these dinosaurs always meant to lift off? You'll never know for sure. None of us will. But that doesn't stop the question from pressing in your chest, heavy and thrilling. You move to leave this canyon now. The echoes of your footfalls bouncing between the walls. For a second, they sound like breathing. Inhale, exhale, following you out. And you realize with a slow grin that you've been doing the same thing all along. The canyon spits you out onto a ledge overlooking a broad, sun-drenched basin. Below, the earth looks like it was crumpled up and smoothed again by some enormous hand. Ridges of stone curve like fingerprints across the ground. And there, in a tangle of shade and sediment, lies the next puzzle, a ledge scattered with bones so delicate they look like they should belong to birds. But they don't. They belong to something older. Stranger. Still feathered but not quite airborne. You slide down the slope feet, skidding against dry earth, and come face to face with a small predator, halfway between elegant and ridiculous. It's Anchiornis or something like it. A Jurassic creature smaller than a turkey, but infinitely cooler. Covered in downy feathers legs, built for leaping claws sharp as your best sarcasm. And yet it didn't fly. Not really. It fell with flair. This little proto-bird had wings, yes, but also long legs and a tail that fought against aerodynamic logic. Its feathers weren't for lift, they were for display warmth or awkward gliding. It could launch itself from trees and maybe coast down, but it wasn't conquering the skies just yet. So why the hollow bones? You crouch beside its fossil, noting the telltale voids in the arm bones. The light construction of the ribs. Air sacs again, no doubt. A breathing system far more advanced than anything that should belong to a ground-bound critter. And it hits you, maybe flight didn't come first, maybe breathing did before creatures ever lifted off, they breathed like flyers. The system was already in place, allowing them to run faster, leap farther, and survive longer under stress. Evolution didn't invent flight, it just used what was already there. Historians still debate whether gliding dinosaurs like this were stepping stones to birds or just an evolutionary cul-de-sac. One of many weird little experiments that didn't make the final cut. Some think these creatures developed feathers for insulation, and only later did those feathers get co-opted for aerial drama. You gently brush soil from the fossil's skull. Its beak is lined with tiny curved teeth. Not quite bird, not quite dinosaur. A whisper in between. Imagine the moment this creature launched itself from a branch. It wouldn't have soared, it would have flailed. Its wings spreading instinctively, catching enough air to stop a fall from turning into a fatal mistake. And then, if it landed safely, it probably strutted like it meant to do that. You glance up at the trees still growing here today. Short, stubby, nothing like the ferns and conifers that once filled this place. But it's enough to imagine. You squint into the branches and almost see it, a fluff-covered blur springing from one limb to another. A puff of dust. A squeaky yelp. Fun fact, modern flying squirrels don't actually fly. They glide, poorly. But if you ask them, they'd say they're aces at it. Evolution doesn't care if you're graceful, it cares if you don't hit the ground too hard. So maybe this little Anchiornis was a prehistoric flying squirrel with murder on its mind. Lighter than it should be. Quicker than it looked. Not yet a bird, but breathing like one. You take a breath now, trying to mimic that unidirectional airflow again. It's hard. Your mammal lungs are simple bags compared to what this creature had, a system that moved air in and out, back and forth, in an elegant loop. You exhale and it feels like cheating. You remember reading once that raptors, modern birds of prey, can hunt at high altitudes without slowing down. It's their breathing. While a human would be gasping, they're slicing through clouds. The ancestors of those raptors, dinosaurs like this one, had the blueprint. There's a moment where the wind picks up, rustling the nearby brush. Dust twirls into a little spiral, and for one blink-long moment you swear it outlines wings. Not real ones. Not now, but once. The bones in front of you tell the truth. They don't lie. They were hollow. They breathed in loops. They were waiting for flight to catch up. You sit a while longer, tracing the contours of the fossil with your eyes, not your hands. Some things deserve to be looked at, not touched. Especially when they're halfway between dream and anatomy. And when you finally stand, it's with the sense that something almost happened here. Something important. Not flight, not yet, but the moment before. You follow the basin's edge until the dirt thins into scrub grass, and the scrub grass yields to a soft, springy mat of moss. Your boots make no sound now. Everything feels muted, like you've stepped into a prehistoric cathedral. Overhead, the sky darkens not with weather, but with time. You swear it. You duck beneath a low canopy of cycads and catch the outline of another creature. This one is big. Its ribs curve like the slats of a shipwreck open to the air, and even in death it looks like it's breathing. You step closer. It's a theropod, not a T-Rex, too early for that, but something just as sleek. Maybe a Cryolophosaurus if you want to get fancy. Its chest is wide, not bulky. Its torso narrow but long. And its ribcage, its marvelous, terrifying ribcage, looks like it could inhale the horizon. You press your palm gently to one of the ribs, then pull back. Cold. Stone. But it once moved like a bellows. Dinosaurs like this didn't just breathe, they breathed with power. Every step drove air through a network of sacs tracheae and those endlessly hollow bones. It wasn't just about being lighter, it was about being better at staying alive. You wouldn't know it from their teeth, but the real weapon was oxygen. You walk around to the side and imagine its gait, not a lumbering plod, but a tight, coiled prowl. Every motion controlled. Muscles fueled by a constant river of oxygen-rich blood. Lungs fixed and rigid, but always full. Air sacs doing the dirty work, expanding, contracting, channeling breath like orchestra conductors. And it makes sense. You don't chase prey with lungs like a paper bag. Modern birds inherited this system intact. Their lungs don't inflate. Their chest doesn't puff up. Instead, the air rushes through in one direction thanks to those sacs tucked into their bellies, their backs, even their thighs. Historians still debate whether these early theropods had a fully developed unidirectional system or if they were halfway there. What's clear is they weren't breathing like lizards. They weren't holding their breath between sprints. They were built for motion. You crouch down, tracing a groove in the fossil's pelvis where yet another sac might have nested. The bones around it are paper-thin but strong, impossibly so. You knock once gently and the sound rings, echoes. You can almost hear the heartbeat that once pounded beside it. Fun fact: in modern birds, the air sac system helps regulate body temperature. It acts like an internal cooling fan, which explains why some dinosaurs in hot climates survived better than expected. They didn't overheat, they vented. like portable climate-controlled meat missiles. A shadow moves overhead and you duck instinctively, heart racing. Nothing's there. Just a big bird probably, maybe a hawk, maybe a vulture curious about what you're sniffing around for. But your body doesn't relax right away, because your brain is imagining something else, something with claws and a gaze that never blinks. That's the other thing. A creature like this, with that kind of breath control, could stalk for hours, wait patiently, conserve energy, then sprint silent, ruthless, alive with air and fire for just long enough to win. You step back and look at the fossil from a distance. It doesn't look like a skeleton anymore. It looks like a framework, like scaffolding for something that burned hot and bright and fast. You think about your own lungs. 2 sacs in your chest, good enough for walking, talking, panicking in traffic, but nothing like this. No wonder they outlasted so many of their kin. They weren't just the biggest or strongest, they were the most efficient. You take a deep breath now. Human style, slow and expanding, and it feels clumsy, like breathing through a straw while watching a fire hose at work. You scan the edges of the clearing for more bones, and sure enough, there's a smaller set nearby. Juvenile, maybe. Or a smaller species entirely. Same ribs, same air sacs, same signs of a body that didn't waste a single breath. It's humbling, really. To think that before birds, before mammals, before anything really figured out how to win the evolutionary marathon, there were creatures built like this, breathing better than you ever will, quietly mastering a world you'll only ever imagine in fragments. You settle on a rock and watch the sky again. There's a breeze now warm and full of dust. You close your eyes, and for a moment, just one, you swear your lungs forget how they're supposed to work. They try something else. They try breathing like a predator. You leave the low forest behind and climb toward higher ground boots, slipping in patches of gravel that glint like fossilized sugar. The air here feels thinner, sharper. As you crest a ridge, the world below unfolds like a forgotten map scrubland, etched with old water lines, boulders arranged like punctuation marks left behind by something ancient and hurried. And then you see it, the island. It's not really an island now, just a raised plateau surrounded by deep gullies. But once long ago, it may have been surrounded by water. Isolation tends to make things weird. You already know this. That's why marsupials rule Australia and why island birds sometimes forget how to fly. But here in this fossil-rich patch of uplifted stone, evolution did something else entirely. It made things light. You shuffle closer and spot the first sign, an impossibly thin toe bone curled and delicate like a violin bridge. And then a spine barely thicker than a pencil running in a graceful arc across the earth. These bones don't belong to a giant. They belong to a micro-dinosaur, a feathered, hollow-boned blur of a creature that likely weighed no more than a squirrel and lived like a stunt double in Fast Forward. You crouch to examine it and smile despite yourself. It's absurd how small it is. Hollow bones make sense for giants, T-Rex cousins, enormous sauropods trying not to collapse under their own ambition. But for this was finesse. This was agility. It's called Mahakala, and it's kind of a mess in the charming way of evolutionary experiments. Small, agile, lightweight, and yes, full of those telltale air cavities. The bird-like blueprint scaled down, the whisper of flight. Except it didn't fly. Not quite. Historians still debate whether Mahakala was becoming a bird or stopped short of trying. What's clear is that its skeleton showed all the signs of being prepped for airborne greatness, air sacs, long arms, lightweight frame, and the hollow bones to match. And here's the wild part. This island version was smaller than its mainland relatives. On land, its cousins were bigger, heavier, meaner. But here, surrounded by nothing, it downsized, got quicker and lighter. Because on islands, gravity negotiates. Isolation changes everything. Predators shrink, prey gets bold. An evolution rewrites the script on a cocktail napkin. Hollow bones became more than a convenience, they became survival. A lighter creature eats less, moves faster, and escapes predators that don't even exist yet. Fun fact on the island of Flores, humans evolved into hobbit-sized versions of themselves. And on Madagascar, giant birds flew poorly, but ran like Olympic sprinters. Islands are weird, and they make creatures weird right back. So Mahakala didn't evolve hollow bones to fly here. It evolved them to survive here. Same trick, different outcome. You walk the ridge, spotting more fossils peeking out like breadcrumbs. A partial wing claw here, a collapsed pelvis there. All signs of creatures that weren't quite dinosaurs anymore, but weren't birds either. Just light. And that's what hits you, isn't it? We always talk about dinosaurs as thunder. Big, loud, world-ending. But what you're seeing here is the opposite. Quiet, quick, so light that a stiff breeze might have carried it downhill like a plastic bag. These creatures weren't kings. They were ghosts with hearts. You settle on a flat stone and feel the wind rising. It whips over the ridge and pushes your jacket back cold and insistent. You imagine being one of them, scanning the gully, darting between ferns, air sacs, puffing and deflating in an effortless rhythm. No panting, no panic, just constant motion. They must have been beautiful when they moved. Not majestic, just practical, like watching a machine do exactly what it was built to do. You glance back at the bones and try to picture flesh feathers life. The air sacs pulsing, the eyes alert, the bones flexing under skin that never sagged, never wasted space. You wonder how many of them lived here. How many ran this ridge-light as breath, never knowing their bones would be their story. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Flight wasn't the goal. Breath was. You climbed down from the island ridge, feet coated in dust, thoughts heavier than bones have any right to be. Below you, a dry basin spreads out like a forgotten stage. And right in the center, cracked, overgrown, awkwardly fenced off with weather-warped wood, is an old excavation site. The sign is long gone, but you know this place, you've seen the photos. Black and white snapshots of Victorian men in terrible hats squatting beside fossils they didn't understand. This is where the mistake began. You step over the fence and into history's messiest debate. For over 150 years, these bones were misread, mislabeled, misunderstood. Because they didn't fit the story. You kneel next to a dusty case of fragments. Ribs, vertebrae, and what looks like part of a claw. They're hollow, of course, beautifully so. But when they were first found, scientists assumed the thin walls meant fragility. That this creature couldn't have been strong, couldn't have been fast. Certainly not a dinosaur, they called it a bird. Which, to be fair, wasn't completely wrong, but not completely right either. This is the story of Archaeopteryx, the most famous fossil that nobody knew how to classify. When it was discovered in the 1860s, it shocked the world. Here was a creature with wings and feathers and teeth and claws. A bridge between bird and reptile, or so they thought. But the bones told a quieter story, a subtler one. Archaeopteryx had hollow bones, yes, pneumatic cavities even, but so did its cousins, many of which weren't trying to fly. They were just efficient breathers. Evolution had already wired them with a bird-like respiratory system long before flight entered the chat. You run your hand over a cast of its sternum, not keeled like modern birds, flat, grounded. The kind of breastbone that suggests flight was more a possibility than a plan. Historians still debate whether Archaeopteryx could fly at all or just glide awkwardly between trees like a confused umbrella. Some say it flapped, others say it fell with style. Nobody can quite agree. But here's what they all missed. At first, the hollow bones weren't proof of flight. They were evidence of something deeper. A breathing system already in place, one that moved air through the body in a one-way stream like a breeze through a tunnel. Flight didn't create hollow bones. Hollow bones allowed for flight. It's not a distinction most textbooks make, but here among the bones and the bad hats it matters. You sit back and glance around the excavation. Nearby, a crumbling sign still holds a painted bird silhouette awkward stretched entirely wrong. It looks like someone slapped wings on a lizard and called it science, and that's kind of what happened. Because for years, dinosaurs were imagined as slow, dumb, cold-blooded brutes, and birds were something else: elegant, advanced, unrelated. Fun fact, even in the early 2000s, some textbooks still said birds came from the reptiles that survived, as if that sentence alone didn't contain 100 years of confusion. You look back down at the bones and wonder how many other fossils were misfiled, labeled as birds when they were really dinosaurs, or dinosaurs mislabeled as fragile because of their hollow frames. One scientist once joked that if we found modern birds as fossils, we might assume they were too delicate to survive. And yet, have you seen a seagull steal a sandwich? These creatures are built like titanium nightmares. It's all about perspective. The bones in front of you were once laughed at. Too weird, someone said. Too bird-like, said another. And for decades, people ignored what was right in front of them. Evolution isn't neat. It doesn't separate birds from dinosaurs with a clean line. It hands you a feathered creature with a stiff tail, teeth, claws, and hollow bones and dares you to pick a category. You dust your hands off and stand walking slowly along the site's perimeter. Everywhere you look, the ground is littered with misread potential. Bones that weren't given the credit they deserved. Stories that got rewritten by newer eyes with better questions. You pause at the gate, glance back at the shallow pit where Archaeopteryx once made science panic, and you nod. Because the panic was earned. The bones didn't lie. People just didn't know how to listen yet. You leave the fenced excavation behind, stepping into a sun-drenched forest fringe where the trees are low and spindly and the ground crackles with dry leaves. Every few feet, a root tries to trip you. Evolution, it seems, isn't done with its pranks. This stretch of land feels quieter, more personal. Like it was reserved not for giants or herds, but for things that hopped. Things that blinked. Things that made weird noises in the dark. And then you spot it perched on a split log half embedded in the soil like a lost canoe of fossilized foot. 3 splayed toes, clawed delicate. It looks like it should still be twitching. You kneel. It's not from a bird. Not yet. This belonged to something like Microraptor, a creature as indecisive as evolution gets. 4 limbs with feathers, 2 used like wings, 2 like rudders. A long feathered tail that worked more like a kite string than a steering system. It's not aerodynamic, it's chaotic. You laugh quietly. Because of course, flight didn't start with grace. Microraptor didn't soar, it stumbled into the sky. Or rather, it crashed creatively. You trace the limb bone and notice, yep, it's hollow, not brittle, not frail. Just purpose-built for the kind of physics that no textbook wants to explain. Here's the twist: this creature probably hunted from trees. Not swooped in like an eagle, but more like a ninja pigeon, awkward, flappy, dramatic. It launched itself at prey with the subtlety of a couch being thrown down a flight of stairs. But it worked. Because those bones light, strong, threaded with air sacs, they let it do things others couldn't. They let it fail without breaking. Let it fall with enough forgiveness to try again. Historians still debate whether Microraptor's flight style was ancestral or just an evolutionary side hustle. Was it a preview of birds to come, or a dead-end experiment in aerodynamic absurdity? You suspect it was both. You look up at the canopy, thin as lace, and imagine one of them sitting there, tail twitching, head cocked, plotting its next ungraceful ambush, and suddenly, you get it. Flight didn't arrive as an event, it seeped into being through repetition. Enough failed glides, enough weird feathers in the right places, and eventually the bones got lighter. The air sacs got smarter. The falls got shorter. Fun fact, modern birds that flap poorly like chickens and turkeys can still launch themselves over fences using burst flight, a strategy that doesn't look pretty but works fine. You don't need to be elegant, you just need to get off the ground. You take a few slow steps toward a ring of stones where more fossil bits wait in the shade. A jawbone here, a shoulder blade there, and in the middle something rare, a partial fossil with impressions of feathers preserved in the rock, delicate as frost. You brush your hand just above them, close but never touching. And that's when it clicks, these weren't feathers for flight. Not at first. They were for warmth, for camouflage, for showing off. The breathing system came early, the hollow bones came early, but the sky that came late. It was never the goal. It was the side effect. You look back down at Microraptor's messy design, 4 wings, none quite right. A tail that might have spun it like a leaf in the wind. And still it managed. Nature doesn't care about dignity. It only cares about momentum. The creature exhaled like a bird, ran like a lizard, and glided like a drunk umbrella. And that's all it needed. You sit on a nearby stone, let the sun warm your back and breathe just like they did. Maybe not as efficiently, but just enough to appreciate the absurdity. Because here's the thing, the first animals to fly weren't majestic. They were weird. They were loud. They were hollow-boned disasters learning to fall in style. And that's why they mattered. The forest gives way to open grassland, dotted with ferns and the rustling remnants of cycads. You walk a ridge bordered by long grass where every gust of wind sounds like wings that never quite formed. The sun is low now, bleeding gold across the horizon. Somewhere behind you, something rustles again, but this time you don't flinch. You're starting to understand the rhythm. You come across a trail, not footprints, but a scattering of bones, spaced too deliberately to be random. A tailbone here, a femur further along, and then nothing. It's as if something just let go. And it did. You kneel by the last vertebra and realize what you're looking at. It's a tail. Not just any tail. A tail that once belonged to a small, fast theropod, and it ends abruptly. No tapering, no damage. It just stops like someone edited the skeleton and forgot to paste the last few bones. This is the decoupling point. The moment in evolution where some dinosaurs gave up their long balancing tails in favor of something else. Speed. When you're running fast, like really fast, a tail can help. It balances, counters, corrects mid-leap, but it also weighs you down. And when your legs and lungs are optimized for movement, anything that adds weight becomes suspect. Some of these dinosaurs began to evolve shorter, stubbier tails, or tails that disconnected from key muscle systems, that allowed them to shift their weight forward, center their gravity, and become more agile. They weren't balancing anymore. They were pivoting. And to do that without crashing every time they turned, their bones had to be hollow. Lightweight, breath-efficient, like racing bikes with feathers. Historians still debate which came first, shortened tails or flight adaptations. Did losing the tail help them become airborne? Or did the evolution toward gliding force them to abandon that ancient counterweight? You suspect it wasn't a clean trade. It was more like a negotiation. Less tail here, more air sac there. Hollow bones instead of heavy vertebrae. The skeleton redrawn over and over again until it looked like something new. You reach out and pick up one of the vertebrae. It's smooth and impossibly light like driftwood. You turn it in your hand and wonder how it used to move. With precision, with grace, or with that frantic energy you now associate with modern birds darting through the underbrush. Fun fact. The evolution of pygostyles, that weird fused bone at the end of modern bird tails, wasn't about flight at first. It helped control feathers used for steering, and before that it was just the logical conclusion of shortening the tail. A punctuation mark on a chapter already closing. The bone you hold in your hand. It's from just before that point. You walk the path where this creature's remains trail off and try to picture it a fast, lean predator with a shortened tail and breathing sacs in its back. It didn't fly. It didn't need to. It moved. It darted. It pivoted. It anticipated. Every breath flowed through it like a breeze through reeds. Hollow bones acting not just as a skeleton but as part of the ventilation system. And all that freed up oxygen, it fueled bursts of energy that mammals could only dream of. You stop at a small outcrop where another skeleton curls in the dirt. This one is whole, short tail, long arms, hollow bones, and ribs that look ready to expand forever. You sit beside it and match your breathing to its imagined rhythm. You wonder what it saw before it died, if it ran, if it felt the wind pick up behind it and knew what was coming. Or maybe it never saw it at all. Maybe it lived, fast, breathed deep, and vanished in an instant like so many others. And maybe the reason it mattered wasn't how it moved, but how it let go. Let go of bulk. Let go of tradition. Let go of the tail. Because sometimes to go forward, you have to lose what once kept you balanced. The land flattens now and you move slower, more deliberate. The air feels heavier, denser somehow, as if you're walking into a memory that hasn't quite finished playing out. The soil is darker here, richer. And then you see it half-buried, sun-bleached, but unmistakably massive. A skull. Not just any skull. This one has that signature grimace. The kind of face only a mother or a late-night cable special could love. But this isn't that one, not T-Rex, it's a cousin. An earlier, sleeker version, maybe Gorgosaurus or Albertosaurus. Still huge, still terrifying, but lighter, quicker, and surprisingly bird-like. You circle the fossil and find what you're looking for: hollow bones. Not just in the limbs, those you've come to expect, but in the skull, in the vertebrae, even hints in the pelvic girdle. This wasn't just a meat machine. This was a predator built like a songbird on steroids. And that throws everything off, because we think of these predators as brute force jaw muscle mass. But this one, it moved with the efficiency of a falcon and the lung capacity of a jazz saxophonist. It didn't just sprint, it breathed in a rhythm that never stopped, never staggered. While its prey gasped for air, it just kept going. You crouch beside this rib cage and trace a groove where an air sac cavity once nestled. The bone curves softly, gracefully, as though built with movement in mind. And you realize this thing wasn't designed just to kill. It was designed not to waste a single breath doing it. Historians still debate just how much of the bird-style respiration system was present in these large theropods. Some argue only the smallest ones had the full, unidirectional flow. Others point to fossils like this riddled with pneumatic openings and say, no, the big ones had it too. They had to. You glance around and see more bones scattered like punctuation. A femur here, a forearm there. All of it lighter than it should be. All of it made to move, not just crush. Fun fact, the modern ostrich has some of the most powerful legs in the animal kingdom, and yes, they're hollow-boned. The structure doesn't weaken, it focuses. Compresses strength without adding burden. You walk to the skull and peer into the nasal cavity. It's deeper than you expect, almost cavernous. More airspace, more flow. You wonder how it would have sounded. Not a roar, probably. More like a resonating hiss amplified through hollow tubes and echo chambers. That thought doesn't sit easy. You take a slow step back. The bones aren't threatening anymore, but they hold presence. Not weight, just presence. Like something watching you from a better evolutionary seat. You pause and think, maybe that's what made these predators so dangerous. Not just their teeth, but their efficiency. No wasted steps. No wasted air. Hollow bones didn't make them fragile. They made them relentless. You sit nearby, knees to your chest, and breathe again, slowly matching your rhythm to the imagined cadence of this long-gone killer. It's not easy. Your lungs puff in and out, up and down. But this creature, its breath flowed like a stream through its bones. Cool, constant quiet, like nature was humming inside it. You think back to everything you've seen. Small gliders, agile runners, awkward, crash landers, and now this. A giant with the same blueprint scaled up and brutalized. It makes sense. Why redesign perfection? The system worked, so evolution just plugged it into new models. From chicken-sized proto-birds to apex predators, the breathing stayed. Because no matter the form, the rules didn't change. Breathe better, move faster, live longer. You brush the dust from your jeans, give the fossil one last glance, and whisper a thank you because respect seems appropriate. Then you walk on, leaving behind the echo of something that once breathed like a bird and hunted like a nightmare. You're further from trees now. The landscape spreads wide exposed, nothing between you and the sky but the heat. Even the shadows feel shallow here, like they're trying to escape the sun. You shield your eyes and scan the horizon, and then you feel it. The ground isn't shaking, but your body remembers that it should. Like some ancient part of your DNA is flinching in advance. Because this place tells a story of something ending. The air has that pressure, the kind that comes right before lightning strikes or history changes. You've entered the Cretaceous closeout sale. The end is coming. It always does. And you're walking across a plain littered with clues not of meteors yet, but of choice. Of who got to live and who didn't. And one of those clues, bones. Specifically the weight of them. You find two skeletons not far apart. One is huge solid limbs, thick ribs, bones like furniture. The other, half the size frame like scaffolding limbs, thin and light bones hollow. Guess which one's lineage survived? The big one probably had muscle for days, but the little one had lungs that didn't pause, bones that didn't drag, and a metabolism that didn't need 3 pounds of food per hour. This isn't about strength anymore. It's about energy. You crouch near the larger fossil. A hadrosaur, maybe? Its bones are beautiful, strong, intact, but heavy. You tap a rib and it thunks like a bowling pin. You imagine it running, laboring under its own weight, panting when chased. It had size, yes, but it also had limits. Now, the smaller one may be a Trudon or something close. Its bones aren't just lighter, they're smarter. The internal structure forms a lattice like a geodesic dome. Light, but strong. The kind of thing nature builds when it's trying to outlast everything. Historians still debate whether this weight difference played a direct role in survival during the mass extinction. But really, how could it not? Fun fact, the average bird has a higher body temperature than a mammal and processes oxygen more efficiently. That came from their dinosaur ancestors, and those ancestors had bones just like this. You step back and look at both skeletons side by side. One built to dominate. One built to adapt. When the meteor hit, if it was a meteor, because even now the details keep shifting, it didn't just wipe out the big things. It wiped out anything that couldn't bend, couldn't shift, couldn't shrink its needs. And the creatures with hollow bones. They weighed less, needed less, breathed better. You picture it. A sky going dark, plants dying, temperatures dropping. Everything big falls first, too hungry, too slow, too heavy. But the hollow-boned survivors, they keep moving. Forage better, stay warm longer. Breathe in what little air is left and do more with it. That's the trick. Not just surviving impact, but the years after. The long winter, the famine, the silence. You sit between the fossils and imagine the world blinking out one species at a time. The ground freezing, ash falling like snow, and still something small feathered light as a shadow hops between the trees. Its breath doesn't catch. Its lungs don't panic. It eats bugs. It hides. It waits. And it lives. Because hollow bones weren't just a flight feature. They were a survival mechanism. They made the creature inside resilient, The big one couldn't adjust. It needed too much. Its strength became its weakness. Its bones turned into anchors. You run your hand over the dust covering the Troodon's ribcage. It's barely there, like it's trying to disappear, like it never wanted to be found. But here it is. Proof that sometimes the lightest touch is the one that lasts. And you wonder, in a world falling apart, what would you rather be, strong or hollow? You're colder now, not metaphorically actually colder. The air here bites a little. The ground is firm, almost icy, and that's fitting because this place wasn't always dry, or gray, or quiet. Welcome to prehistoric Antarctica long before penguins had fashion sense. The snow under your feet crunches, but the rocks peeking through are old, volcanic and full of secrets. You stand in a valley between worn peaks, and for a second the wind clears and reveals a shape curled like a comma in the earth. A fossil. You approach slowly, not out of fear but out of respect, because you recognize what this is. It's not big, about the size of a modern eagle, wings outstretched, tail stiff, hollow bones, and just beneath the ribcage, faint traces of the air sac system. Yes, even here, in the cold and the dark, in what would eventually become the Earth's forgotten basement, this creature still breathed like a bird. Its name might have been Antarctopelta, or something similar, though the exact classification has changed more than once. Doesn't matter. What matters is this: it had hollow bones even in the coldest place on Earth. You crouch beside it and marvel. Because here's the thing most people don't know: parts of Antarctica were once warm, temperate even, with forests, lakes, bugs. But as the climate shifted, some dinosaurs adapted. They stuck around longer than you'd expect. And even as the world changed, they didn't give up their hollow bone trick. Historians still debate how much of the bird-like respiratory system helped these creatures endure freezing conditions. Was it just about oxygen? Or did the air sacs play a role in temperature regulation too? Could these sacs have circulated not just air but warmth? You lean close and see the pattern in the vertebrae again. The signature scoops and indentations that once held the pneumatic loops. Even in fossils frozen for eons, the architecture of breath remains. Fun fact: in modern birds, airflow through the air sacs can help cool the body during flight and retain warmth in colder climates. It's the Swiss Army knife of respiratory systems, and its ancestors had it first. You touch your gloved hand to the fossil's exposed wing. Feather impressions are long gone if they were ever there, but the shape remains. The socket is rotated slightly forward, meant for flapping maybe, or for insulation. This wasn't just a dinosaur, it was a survivor. One that didn't retreat when the planet got mean. And isn't that the pattern you've been chasing? The hollow bones weren't always about soaring. They were about efficiency, about doing more with less, about existing at the edge of what was possible and still finding a way to move. The snow starts again, soft flakes drifting like ash from a distant volcano. You tilt your head back, eyes squinting against the white. And somewhere in the silence you imagine the sound of breath. A quiet, steady rhythm through tubes and sacs and lungs that never needed to pause. This creature didn't just survive by accident, it was engineered for it. Not by design, not by intention, but by a long chain of tiny, beautiful mutations that led to this. An animal built, light-breathing, heavy, ready to outlast almost anything. You stand and take one last look around. Bones half lost in permafrost. Ridges of rock that remember fire beneath their icy crust. And always, always, that whisper of air through ancient ribs. It's humbling, isn't it? To think that even here where nothing should have endured, something did. And it breathed like a bird. The path bends again, leading you out of the cold and into something warmer, older too. A coastal region, now ancient cliffs overhanging a shoreline long reclaimed by time. You can hear the wind before you see the sea. Except there's no water anymore, just wind-shaped stone, and a low hum that comes from nowhere in particular. This place smells like salt and iron and dust. And nestled against the cliffside is a final surprise, a cluster of nests, fossilized but unmistakable. You spot the rim's first round shallow impressions and then the bones. Small ones, light ones, dozens of them. Each skeleton slightly different, but all of them share one thing: hollow bones. Not thinned by decay, engineered that way. Carefully, efficiently, incredibly light for their size. And you realize something: we tend to think evolution rewards extremes. The biggest, the fastest, the smartest. But here, what you're seeing is a different strategy entirely. Staying small, staying light, staying quiet. These weren't the dinosaurs that grew to monstrous proportions. They were the ones that resisted the pressure to get bigger. They didn't outcompete by force, they outlasted by needing less. You crouch beside one of the tiny skeletons, maybe an early avilan, maybe something like Confuciusornis or Eosinopteryx. Doesn't matter. What matters is what its bones tell you. This creature didn't weigh much, didn't breathe like you do, and didn't panic when the ground shook. It had air sacs. And those sacs fed into a system that pushed air through its body in one continuous loop. Inhale or exhale. It didn't matter. The oxygen kept flowing. No pauses, no panting, no compromise. Historians still debate whether this lightness was intentional adaptation or a side effect of other pressures: climate, competition, predation. But the result was clear. The creatures that remained hollow-boned had a distinct edge. They lived longer, they matured faster, they passed down lungs that were more like wind tunnels than balloons. Fun fact: many modern birds, even the tiniest ones, have stronger relative lung capacity than most mammals. Hummingbirds, for instance, beat their wings 70 times per second and still have oxygen to spare. That's not just impressive, it's ancestral. You move gently through the nesting site, careful not to disturb the fragile outlines. Some of the young appear curled into themselves, wings half open. It's almost too delicate to look at. But what's striking isn't the fragility, it's the design. These creatures weren't weak, they were refined, stripped down to the essentials. Their hollow bones weren't a flaw. They were the final product. The nests are surrounded by feather impressions, the faintest traces of keratin filaments preserved in sediment. Some are ornamental, some functional, but all are tied to survival. Feathers for warmth display lift, and underneath it all, the bones that carried the story forward. You sit beside the nests and let the wind tug at your sleeves. For the first time, the silence feels peaceful, not empty, rested. Because this is what it looks like when evolution doesn't panic. When it plays the long game. When it decides that staying light is better than being heavy. These dinosaurs didn't strive to be more. They mastered being enough. You watch the clouds drift overhead, slow and aimless, and you imagine these creatures waking at dawn, stretching those spindly legs, fluffing feathered wings, breathing deep from a system so advanced your own lungs seem primitive by comparison. They didn't roar. They didn't dominate. They just kept going. You're back where you began. The air is warmer again, the wind soft and almost musical as it moves through reeds that line a dry riverbed. Your boots crunch along a path you didn't notice earlier because it wasn't a path. It was a trace, a story told in lightness. You pause and breathe, slowly, deliberately, and something shifts, not outside but inside. You've been walking through millions of years chasing a pattern. And now, standing at the end of it, the pattern is suddenly inside your chest. Because the truth is, you're breathing like they did. Not fully, not efficiently. Your lungs are primitive in comparison. You breathe in, you breathe out. A loop with dead ends, gaps, waste, but the rhythm. The rhythm is theirs. You reach a high point where the land opens into a long, quiet valley. Far below, etched faintly into stone, is the impression of a feather. Just one, curved and delicate. lined with memory. Beside it, a broken rib hollowed light as ash. You close your eyes, and in the dark behind your eyelids, you see them again not as monsters, not as thunder lizards, but as machines of breath. Some walked, some ran, some fell from trees in clumsy bursts of proto-flight, but they all shared one thing: a design meant to keep going. And in the silence it clicks. The hollow bones weren't a shortcut to flight. They were a philosophy, a way of existing that said, carry only what you need. Let breath do the heavy lifting, don't fight the air, become it. Fun fact, human lungs, for all their complexity, still operate on the same ancient principle. We inhale oxygen, it powers our muscles, it fuels our fire. But we do it less efficiently, we hold too much, we waste too much, we breathe with weight. You look down at your own ribs and wonder if they were fossils. What would they say? Would anyone know that you once stood here wondering how light a creature could be and still survive? Historians still debate whether the creatures with hollow bones were always destined to become birds, or if birds just happened to be the ones that lasted long enough to be noticed. But you're starting to see it differently now. They weren't a stepping stone. They were the destination, because to breathe better is to live longer, to move lighter, to need less, and to leave behind bones that echo not with thunder but with wind. The sun is low now, warm on your face. You take one last breath, not because it's your last, but because you finally notice it. It moves in, it moves through, and it leaves you standing here weightless, almost in the shadow of the ages. Tonight we walked through the long, patient journey of breath, from the heavy-footed giants of the Jurassic to the feathered ghosts of the late Cretaceous. Along the way, we discovered that the dinosaurs with hollow bones weren't fragile, they were innovators. Survivors. Creatures built to breathe smarter, move lighter, and outlast their louder, heavier cousins. Their bones didn't just support their bodies, they housed a complex respiratory system borrowed today by birds that moved air in a one-way loop. That loop became their legacy. It made them faster, more efficient, and ironically more likely to survive, not because they were strong, but because they didn't need to be. We watched creatures give up balance for speedtails, for agility, bulk, for breath. We saw flight not as a goal, but a side effect of something even more fundamental: adaptation through lightness. A mindset written in bone. Even as the world collapsed in fire and frost, some of these air-filled beings found ways to endure. They shrank. They hid. They breathed deeply even in the dark. And they became birds. But more than that, they became proof that sometimes the ones who carry less go farther. So if you're still here, still breathing, just notice it. The rhythm, the lightness, the quiet. It's a rhythm shared across millions of years. And in that rhythm, you carry something ancient, something hollow, something strong,